And thank you for joining us during the online postgraduate webinar for our PhD at the Warburg Institute. My name is Rebecca and I am a Senior Marketing Officer here at the University of London School of Advanced Study. I'm joined today by Programme Director, Professor Sara Miglietti. Firstly, this is just a reminder that the application deadline for this programme is the 31st of July 2025 for the September intake. I hope this webinar today answers all your questions about studying for a PhD with us, and you'll be on your way to submitting your application. For the first part of the webinar, Sara will be talking through her presentation about studying the programme and how you can benefit from it. Following the presentation, there'll be a live Q&A where we want to answer as many questions as you have about studying with us. So please post your questions in the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. We will be answering your questions live on camera, and we also have a specialist team who will be answering on the chat box. So please do keep an eye on it to see if your question has been answered there. Right, I think we're ready to begin. Sara, it would be great if you could give us a brief introduction about yourself, and then we will start the presentation.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to this webinar. So I'll be talking a little bit about the Warburg in general, the program, the PhD program, and then some practical details about different routes that you can take, application process, application materials, fees, and funding. And then I'll be looking forward to hearing your questions. So first of all, you probably know a little bit about the Warburg already. What you might not know is that the Warburg Institute is part of the School of Advanced Study of the University of London, which is a federation of different institutes and colleges. And if you join the Warburg, you will also join the school and join the University of London, which gives you access to a lot of great resources, expertise, and facilities. The institute itself is an interdisciplinary research institute dedicated to the interaction of ideas, images, and societies. And we have a special focus on the period that goes from the Middle Ages to the early modern period, but our stuff does branch out backwards and forwards chronologically as well. And we have particular strengths in areas such as the afterlife of classical antiquity, art history, and the idea of images as cultural vehicles, which dates back to our founder, Abi Warburg, Renaissance studies in every aspect, and magic and science. And we have an especially rich collection of books and resources on each of these different subjects. We have a world-class research library of 300,000 volumes, and also special collections, which include a photographic collection, which is an iconographic collection, and the archive that collects materials relating to Abi Warburg and the early period of the Warburg Institute, and also things that were bequeathed to us in more recent times. We also have a brand new exhibition space. We recently refurbished the Institute, and we now have a gallery space where we have temporary exhibition, and we have a fantastic exhibition on tarots going on at the moment. We also have an extensive program of lectures, seminars, and training events, many of which are also offered online. So some of you might have been able to attend some of those online or in person already. And in general, I would say that we are a pretty small place compared to other bigger universities. We have, however, a very thriving, friendly, international, and diverse student community, which includes about 40 MA students every year and about 25 PhD students, as well as, of course, academic and research staff and collection staff, and a lot of postdoctoral fellows as well, who join us for between 3 months and a year in general. So this is who we are. Let's talk a little bit about the program itself. So at the moment, we offer a PhD by research. We will soon also be offering a PhD by practice, which we hope to be able to advertise soon. So I will say a bit more about the PhD by research. If you do have questions about the PhD by practice, I can answer to the best of my abilities later in the Q&A. So PhD by research means that your main goal is to research and write a substantial piece of academic scholarship of about 100,000 words, which is supposed to make a significant and original contribution to scholarship. And you would be working on this research project, of course, independently, but under the supervision of leading experts in your field. I will say a bit more about supervision arrangement later, but each student is assigned 2 supervisors, and the supervisory team works very closely with you, depending on your needs. And the goal of the PhD is, of course, primarily to complete this thesis, but it's also understood as a journey of professional development. So it's a way for you to extend your knowledge in a particular field, but also to gain new skills that can be highly transferable.
Sorry, Sarah, I don't know if you can hear me. We couldn't see your slides, I believe. I don't know why, but I'm just going to, I've shared your slides, so I will flick through the slides as you talk. Could you just let me know which slide you're on?
Yeah, I'm on the slide PhD by research.
Okay, let me just get that PhD by research.
So should I end the slideshow then?
No, I think it's fine. If you're happy, you can use your slides, and now I can see them on the screen.
Okay, so you are on the slide 2, the Warburg PhD by research?
Yes, I am. And if you just let me know, next slide, and I will flip through slides.
Okay, great. And sorry everybody for the slight inconvenience. So here you can see everything I was sort of talking through, and I was just on that last but one point, which is the idea of the PhD as not just writing a PhD thesis, but also gaining that sort of broader professional development, which includes attending events and seminars to hear about what other people do, their own projects, and also present at the seminars yourselves. There's a wide range of research training. Again, I'll come back to that in a moment. Language classes, short courses, reading groups, academic writing tutorials. So the idea is that by the time you leave the program, you haven't just written a substantial piece of scholarship, but you have also gained skills that you can then use in whatever career you want to undertake afterwards. And as part of that professional journey, we also do work with you to make sure that you can enhance your profile through other things other than research, which can include things like teaching, publications, internships, and international exchanges. And I want to stress that the School of Advanced Study is part of the Turing scheme, which if you haven't heard of it, is what has been introduced instead of the Erasmus scheme, which the UK has left following Brexit. And the Turing scheme enables you to spend a period of research at institutions abroad. And so in many ways, it gives you many of the same benefits of the previous Erasmus scheme. Again, I won't comment on the PhD by practice for the time being, but if you're interested in that, we can come back to that later in the Q&A. So next slide, please. Are you on the next slide? Because I can't see it.
Yes. Yes, I am.
Okay. Great. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what you can do with a PhD from the Warburg. And a lot of our alumni has gone on to very successful careers, whether in academia or outside of academia. So here you have a list of institutions, again, academic and non-academic, where we have been able to place our graduates. So as you can see, there's a range of different career options that would be open to you following a PhD at the Warburg Institute. And we do have connections with many of these institutions as well. So next slide, please. Okay, so PhD routes. There are 4 different ways in which you can currently take our PhD. And again, I'm speaking here of PhD by research. So you can do it on-site full-time or part-time, and distance learning full-time and part-time. And so I will be going through the on-site full-time option first, which is our standard route. Next slide, please.
Yep.
Okay, for the on-site full-time PhD, you're looking at 3 years of work. This is the standard registration period, plus a possible 4th year if you find that you need more time, and or what we call a writing up year, which is when you've done all the research, you just need more time to polish the thesis and do the proofreading, etc. But during this period of 3 to 4 years, you can expect to have regular check-ins with your supervisors, in general about once a month, a bit more frequently actually when you begin, because you need to be guided a bit more strictly, let's say, to make sure that the project is on the right track. But just to say again that you would be working independently, but with guidance from your supervisors. And to make sure again that you stay on track, there are also milestones each year. So at the end of the first year, you would be passing what we call progression, which is an informal interview with your supervisors to make sure that everything is progressing smoothly. And normally by the end of the second year, you would be past what we pass what we call the upgrade. So you need to know that when you're registering for a PhD with us, you are actually initially registered as an MPhil student, and you are upgraded to PhD status following the result of this end of year two upgrade interview. And then if all goes well, you go into your third year and eventually you submit a thesis again of about 100,000 words. So it's a pretty substantial piece of writing. And the examination takes place with two experts in your field who are not your supervisors. And then hopefully everything goes well and you get your degree. The PhD thesis is the main thing that you're supposed to be doing during your PhD. There is no formal coursework. This is different from other academic systems you may be more familiar with, where you're also taking classes on the side. Again, we don't have anything of that kind. We do ask all the PhD students to attend our weekly work in progress seminar, which takes place every Wednesday. And it's the one thing that everybody in the Warburg community sort of comes to every week. And so it's an important moment to listen to each other's research, but also to come together as a community. We also ask our PhD students to give research papers in years 2 and 3, again, as part of their professional development. And we do also offer a range of other options for people who are interested in working more on their methodology side or social events for PhD students. And as mentioned, a wide range of research training seminars and events, again, optional, but highly recommended. Next slide, please.
Yep.
So with a part-time option on site, you are looking very much at the same kind of structure as the full-time PhD. It's just that everything is spaced out to take 6 years of research instead of 3. And so the milestones of progression and upgrade that I mentioned are also spaced out accordingly. So for instance, progression, which normally takes place at the end of the first year for full-time students, would take place more towards the end of the second year for part-time students. The important thing is that you can change from part-time to full-time and vice versa as needed and as many times as needed. So if you need to start part-time for instance, financial reasons, and then you secure funding, then you can switch to full-time afterwards. Okay, we'll come back to that later if you're interested, but just a quick note about distance learning. So the standard route of our PhD is on-site, and there are many reasons why we strongly encourage students to be based in London, if at all possible. First of all, of course, the fact that they would then have access to our resources, including the library, but also for the sort of more communal and personal side of the experience. And we do consider distance learning applications for students who are not able to reside in London for whatever reason, but we do screen them on a case-by-case basis to make sure that the work has, every likelihood to succeed. So we need to make sure that the students will have access to the primary material for their research. And so, for instance, if you're working on a foreign archive material that is held outside of the UK and you are going to be able to live closer to your primary material, then it actually makes sense for you to be based abroad. But you also need to have research libraries or other research resources and facilities close to you to enable you to carry out the research to the necessary standards. So we make sure that those conditions are met before we extend the distance learning offer. We also need to make sure that students who are on the distance learning route already command all of the skills and languages that are required to undertake the research proposed, because they wouldn't have access to the full range of training that we can offer in person at the Warburg. So again, happy to take questions on this later if there are any. So next slide, please.
Yep.
Okay, so where to start, if you are interested in exploring a PhD with us. So first of all, the question to ask yourself is whether you already have a research project. So not just a sort of vague area of interest, but a well-defined research proposal. To apply for a British PhD, again, because there is no coursework, you start right away with the research. You need to already know precisely what you're going to be working on. So eventually what you will want to have is a piece of writing between 1,000 and 2,000 words, which covers the sources that you plan to examine, so the research material, your key research questions, the current state of the scholarship, and why your research fills a gap in the scholarship or is able to challenge the scholarship in a meaningful way. So also the relevance and originality of your proposed research, the methodology you plan to adopt, and also a timeline for the project. So that's the first thing. And then next slide, please.
Yep.
So the next question to ask yourself, and that's something that you can also discuss with a prospective supervisor, is whether your project is realistic for the time frame of a PhD. So we constantly see proposals that are extremely interesting but far too broad, and so you need to make sure that your intended research questions are answerable in the time frame of a PhD, again, 3 to 4 years full time. Next slide. And then this is equally important, is whether we are the right place for you to carry out the research. So are we able to support the research? The important thing here for you is to do a little bit of homework, go to our website. There is a page, PhD Supervisors, where you can see who is currently offering PhD supervision at the Warburg. And we have little descriptions of our research interests and research and supervision abilities. So it's a good idea for you to identify a potential supervisor and maybe reach out for an initial informal chat, and we can then take it from there. Next slide, please.
Yep.
Finally, there are some entry requirements, and I will have a separate slide on that later, just as a sort of summary, but you need to have the sort of qualifications in hand, including a good MA in a relevant field. If your first language is not English, proof of language according to the School of Advanced Studies requirements, and academic references to be able to even apply for the program. Next slide, please.
Yep.
Let's look a little bit more in detail at the application process. As Rebecca mentioned, so the deadline for starting in September is the 31st of July, but we do have 2 intakes every year. So if you miss for whatever reason the 31st of July deadline, then there's a second chance to start in January with a deadline on the 31st of October. Please note that these are just the deadlines to apply for the PhD program, and there are separate deadlines for funding. And in fact, there's only one scholarship that is currently still on offer. It's probably too late now to be going through the entire application process in time to be considered for that scholarship. But nevertheless, I will still say a little bit about it later, just for context. But again, this might change compared to other PhD systems in different countries. When you apply for a PhD in the UK, you're not automatically given funding to carry out the research. And so you need to submit 2 separate applications for the PhD program and for funding. And that's something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to sum up, before applying, check out our website, make sure that we are a good fit for each other, make sure that there would be a supervisor who's able to follow your research. Develop a research proposal as close as you can get to that 1,000 to 2,000 words, covering all these points that I mentioned, and reach out to prospective supervisor, even for a very informal initial chat to discuss your proposal. Next slide, please.
Yep.
And again, just to point that out once more, you will need a good MA degree in a relevant field and a certificate of language proficiency if your first language is not English. And here on the slide, you can see what the School of Advanced Study currently accepts as suitable qualifications. Next slide, please.
Yep.
Okay, so say that you've had that initial conversation and we've encouraged you to submit a full application. Here you can see what materials you will be then required to submit: a CV, a research proposal, again along those lines that I mentioned, degree transcripts or certificates of your previous education, a language certificate for non-native speakers, an academic reference. This can be a professional reference if you're out of academia for you have been out of academia for a while, and it's easier for you to get a professional reference, but academic references are preferred. And then a writing sample that can demonstrate your ability to carry out academic research. If the application seems viable, we then invite you to an online interview. And then following that, either we ask you to revise and resubmit slightly your proposal, or if we're satisfied that this is a good proposal, we accept you. And in very few cases, I would say, if there has been some initial conversation with staff, would we turn the application down? Because in general, if we find the project viable, we invite you. If we don't find the project viable, we don't even invite you to apply. So that's one more reason why it's very important to have that initial conversation with us so that we don't waste your time. Okay, so next slide, please.
Yeah.
So here's a couple of links, which I understand is not ideal because you can't actually click on them from where you're sitting now. But just to let you know that on the School of Advanced Studies website, there is a section on fees and funding and tuition fees. And there you can find the current tuition fees for the PhD. And there are variable fees, of course, depending on whether you are a home student or an overseas student, so an international student, and whether you're doing the PhD full-time or part-time. And there are also links both on the Warburg website and on the School of Advanced Studies website for funding options. Let me just show you the one scholarship that is currently on offer. Next slide, please.
Yep.
So this is a scholarship that is internal to the Warburg Institute, and it's open to home students. So international students, unfortunately, cannot apply for this one. And it provides fees and maintenance. And again, the deadline for this, unfortunately, is coming up fast. It's on the 14th of March, and you would have to already have been accepted to the PhD program, so have gone through the full application process to be eligible to apply. So I'm not sure that this is going to be highly relevant here, but we tend to offer this scholarship every year. I cannot guarantee that we will offer it again next year, but in general, this is the sort of funding package that we can offer at least once a year. So this is it from now. Final slide, please.
Yep.
So these are a couple of useful email addresses, my own, and then the Warburg General Inquiries address that you can follow if you have any further follow-up questions. But of course, we do have the opportunity now to have a little Q&A. So looking forward to answering as many questions as I can now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah. That was really interesting, and I hope it's answered some of your questions. Now we're going to move on to the live Q&A, and I can see there are already some questions in the chat box, but please keep answering any questions you might have, and we will get through them. So let me just get the first question. So we've got a question here from Giacomo asking, beyond the project, I wanted to better understand the issue of scholarships or private funding. And in particular, regarding this second point, I would like to know how it could be obtained. Okay, so if you could speak maybe a little bit more about the process of scholarships and securing funding.
Yeah, so about 50% of our students are self-funded. And many of them are working part-time to fund their studies. So that is one option that is popular with students if they haven't been able to access external sources of funding. And then in terms of funded students, we have a mix of students who have applied for internal Warburg scholarships or who have been funded by the AHRC, which is the UK Arts and Humanities Research Center. And then there are other students who have secured their own external sources of funding independently. And there are also some who have taken out loans. So there's a combination of ways that you can fund your studies, essentially. If you go to our website, there's a full breakdown of options. essentially we don't have any requirements. So whatever works for you works for us. We do appreciate that it's difficult to carry out PhD research in London unless you have some sort of financial means to support yourself. So if this is something that is going to be of concern to you, that's definitely something that we can discuss separately.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. And I think my colleague has put in a link to the funding page on the SAS website, so everybody can access it there. So the next question we've got is, how frequently are the monthly in-person supervision sessions on a part-time PhD?
That's a great question. Okay, so the school's recommendation is that the frequency of the supervision meeting could still be monthly. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that supervisions are definitely about tracking the progress of your research, but they're also about making sure that you're actually engaged in the program. So there's a sort of attendance concern as well. And that is particularly true with respect to students who are non-UK nationals and are studying in the UK on a Tier 4 visa. And we are responsible to the Home Office to track attendance, particularly of the students. So in general, we have a requirement that about once a month, that would be some sort of check-in between the student and the supervisor. It doesn't necessarily mean that it would be a full-fledged supervision where you send some writing beforehand, because we understand that the progress might not be that swift. But at least once a month, you should be making contact with your supervisor, whether you are full-time or part-time.
Great, thank you for that, Sarah. So moving on to the next question, when will research by practice as a route become available for PhD?
The PhD by practice route. So we are currently in the very final stages of finalizing the PhD by practice route. It's a School of Advanced Studies wide proposal, so it's taking a little longer to get things through the various authorizing bodies. But our hope is that we will be able to start advertising soon for a start in September 2025. So yeah, check our website because that is where we'll be posting any updates, of course, but that's the hope.
Great, thank you so much for that. So the next question is, should I have my writing sample complete and ready for review before I contact a potential supervisor?
Thank you. I mean, it wouldn't hurt, but it's definitely not necessary. I think what's important before contacting a potential supervisor is that you would have a good sense of what research project you would be undertaking. Of course, it's also okay to just get in touch with a supervisor and say, well, look, my area of interest is Renaissance art history, particularly in Italy, but that's a bit too vague because, of course, as specific as you can be is, probably a good idea, because then we are able to give you a bit more guidance in terms of whether the project is viable and whether we are the right place to carry it out. So, but you don't have to have all the application materials ready at hand when you first make contact with a potential supervisor.
Sure. Okay, that's really good to know. So the next question we have here from Matthew is, how many days/hours during a week do you expect students to be on campus?
There's not a firm requirement in that sense, but I would say that a lot of our full-time students like to be on campus, which in fact means being in the Warburg Library, which is an incredible place if you have never been, just because it is a great resource. It is a great facility to do your work. So again, it's not our requirement, it's just what I see students enjoying if they can. But again, a lot of our students are part-time students, and so they tend to maybe come 2 days a week. Often they will try to arrange their schedule in such a way that I can be in on Wednesdays, because Wednesdays are in general the day when we have the work in progress seminar, and we tend to be in person as much as we can.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that. The next question we have here is, does Warburg encourage second supervisors based at other institutions for PhDs, and how should we go about identifying them?
That's an excellent question. So Yeah, of course, we do have a good number of our students who are supervised in conjunction either with other institutions altogether, or with other institutes within the School of Advanced Study. So that's also something that we can easily arrange. Um, Sometimes students come to us already with a sense of maybe somebody else who would be good to rope in. So they want to be based at the Warburg for lots of reasons, and they want their first supervisor to be in the Warburg, but they have an idea for a second supervisor somewhere else that could be a good match. And that's definitely a conversation that we're happy to have. And sometimes it's something that comes from us because we realize that we only feel comfortable supervising part of the research, and we don't necessarily have experience extending to every single aspect of the proposed research. And then we seek out external supervisors who would be able to give the complementary expertise required to make sure that we can supervise you as best we can, because really there's a duty of care issue there. When we take you on board, it's a sort of unspoken contract that we will take you to the end of your PhD as successfully as possible. And so we want to make sure that we build the strongest possible supervisory team in that sense.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sarah. So moving on to the next question. How should I prepare to study at PhD level? And how does the teaching differ from having done a master's, say, to then going on to do your PhD?
Yeah, that's a big question. So first of all, I'd say if you have done a master that involved some degree of research. So, for instance, you wrote a final dissertation, for instance, where you had to write a, I don't know, 10 to 15,000 research piece on something that you researched from scratch. Then you probably already know what it takes to develop a big research piece, basically. And the PhD would not differ qualitatively, it would just differ quantitatively, because of course it's a much larger piece of research. But I guess if you have done a master's, then you already have that initial sense of what it would take. Of course, there is no teaching, as I mentioned, in the PhD, and so that would be a big difference. And so one of the things we assess when we screen applications is whether you are ready, because you are really thrown into the deep end when you start a PhD in the UK system, because you're supposed to hit the ground running and start doing the research right away. So we want to make sure that you're able to do that you are able to carry out independent research, essentially.
Great. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That's great. So the next question we have here is there an option for distance learning, and is it effective as studying on campus?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we do have a distance learning option, which we sort of review on a case-by-case basis. A lot of things that we do at the Warburg are hybrid, so you can attend in person or online. Of course, there's a social dimension to being here in person that you miss out on if you are online, but we do offer hybrid as much as we can, because we do appreciate that we do have distance learning students and we want them to be as involved as possible. The one thing I would say that you obviously miss out on if you are a distance learning student is being able to work in our library. And that is why, if we do decide that the distance learning student has submitted a strong case and we're satisfied that they can do the PhD research from wherever they're based, we also do make sure that we build in time in London into their schedule. So it may be that you are based abroad for the entire year, but every year you come here for a couple of weeks so that you can do research in the library, spend time with your supervisors in person, and also just join the PhD community in person, so that you feel a bit more part of the community, I guess, in a physical way. But that's something that can be agreed on a case-by-case basis depending on your needs.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And we've actually just had another question, which is kind of tangentially related to this, from Stephanie, who says that they've reviewed the application as a potential distance learner from the US and have questions about some of the items. Are there resources available for assisting with the application?
Could I just ask you to clarify what you mean about some of the items? Do you mean some of the questions in the application or materials in the application?
Yeah, Stephanie, if you could just provide a follow-up to that question, just write it in the chat box and then we can circle back to
Yes.
specifics of your query.
Just so that I can give you a more precise answer. But in general, I would say, Stephanie, that you can definitely reach out to me, and I can maybe answer via email. We have an admissions team, and they are very friendly and approachable. So if you have technical questions, those preps are more for them. If you have academic questions, then feel free to direct them to me. But yeah, if you can just clarify what you mean by items and resources, then I can maybe give you a bit more guidance.
That's great, thank you. And I know that it was in your presentation, but my colleague will also put your email address in the chat box so that people can take it from there as well. So moving on to the next question. What level of support does a supervisor or tutor give at PhD level?
Great question. So, of course, the very first thing is that they're there to help you with your project, and they are going to be experts in the field, if not on the specific topic that you are researching. So they will be able to sort of give you feedback on whether your arguments are sound, whether you're, maybe neglecting some of the scholarship that exists. So really specific feedback about your research, but also they are there to steer you successfully through that professional development journey that I mentioned. And so they are people with whom you can and should discuss anything from how often should I speak at conferences, or should I try to publish an article, or is it a good idea to apply for the Turing scheme to spend some time in Paris? So there are people with whom you want to discuss every aspect of the PhD journey, not just the chapters in your dissertation, although of course they're there primarily for that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sarah. That's an amazing answer. So on to the next question. What are the expectations in terms of time commitment for studying a PhD? Can you have a full-time or part-time job at the same time? And roughly, I guess, how many hours of studying is there per week?
If it's a full-time, it's a full-time. So it's a full-time job. Essentially, you should expect to spend the most significant part of your working day working on your PhD. Again, it can mean different aspects of what the PhD journey is about. It doesn't mean that you're going to be spending every hour of every day working on chapters of your dissertation. It might mean working on a conference paper, or working as an intern somewhere. So in that expanded sense of working full-time on your PhD journey, more than the PhD dissertation necessarily. But we strongly discourage students from taking on too much work if you are on the full-time route. Again, it's very easy to switch to part-time if you feel that for financial reasons or whatever, you need to take on more work. So if that's the situation, feel free to just submit a form and switch to part-time. In general, the recommendation is that you wouldn't be taking on more than 6 hours a week of work if you are a full-time student. So up to 6 hours, we deem it compatible with the requirements of a full-time PhD. Over 6 hours, not so. And so we would encourage you to switch to part-time.
Okay, thank you. That's really useful to know. And then, so we've got another question here. What career opportunities are there for me once I've completed my PhD, and what are some real life examples of what other students go on to do?
Yeah, so I had that slide, so hopefully that gave you a sense of real places, but because those are truly institutions, both academic and non-academic, where we have been able to place our students in the past. I mean, I say place our students as if, it was us, but of course it was all them, submitting the application and going through the job application process, etc. So there's a general sense that a Warburg PhD is a very sound degree, which equips you to do research, which of course is the main thing if you want to become an academic, and that's why we've had so much success placing students at academic institutions. But when you know how to do research, there's a lot that you can do also in non-academic fields. So some of our graduates have gone on to work in auction houses, in galleries, in libraries, in museums, in the heritage sector in general. Because again, once you can demonstrate, and your PhD thesis is there for that, that you can do research at a very high level, then you can use it in many, many ways.
Great, that sounds so interesting. Thank you so much. The next question, and perhaps the penultimate question, is there an age limit to studying for a PhD? Can somebody be too old to do a PhD?
Nope. We have a lot of mature students, and it's a great joy to have them. When I said that our community is diverse, it's diverse also in terms of age. And it's a great thing. So of course, if you start a PhD later in life, you probably are doing it for slightly different reasons, and that's absolutely okay. I mean, passions for learning, I guess, is the main driver behind all PhD projects, and so there's absolutely no too old for a PhD, not at the Warburg at least.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. We've actually just got another question that's come through on the chat box from Matthew. I live a couple of hours from London by train. If I couldn't relocate to London, should I be considering distance learning?
Well, I wouldn't say so. Of course, we all know that trains are very unreliable at the moment, but I would say that a couple of hours still makes it manageable for you to commute into London regularly enough to use the library and participate in in-person events. So that's more a question for you if you would be willing to make that commitment to come regularly, which can mean just even once a week, but regularly. Because I guess the main difference between distance learning and on campus is not that on-campus students are not on campus all the time, but they can come in as required. Whereas distance learning students, there's just not expectation, and the entire PhD is structured in a different way.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's a really good point, actually. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you for the question.
So the last question, I think, just to sum it up, what is the best way to get in touch with staff to discuss PhD study?
Yeah, so again, feel free to email me if you don't know where to start. But that page, PhD supervisor on the Warburg website, which should be pretty straightforward to find even just through a Google search. It's gonna give you a good sense of what we do and who we are. And so my recommendation is to go there and have a look at our profiles and try contacting the one person that seems like the one with closest research interest to yours. And if they come back to you saying, well, no, it's not really me that you want to talk to, but I can refer you to this other colleague, then we will be recommending other people to talk to. But just make initial contact, I guess it's the one thing, and then we'll take it from there.
Right, perfect. Thank you so much. That's all the questions we have time for today. So I just want to thank everybody for attending the Warburg Institute PhD webinar. My colleague will post in the chat box a link to our inquiries page where you can ask any questions that may have been missed today. And it's just one final reminder that the application deadline is the 31st of July for the September 2025 intake. So I hope to look forward to welcoming you at the School of Advanced Study then. Great. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks, everybody.
Right, thank you. Bye, everybody.